I am going to convene us. And, Jacque and I are joint chairs and have had multiple conversations, and we'll have multiple more. And this agenda reflects those conversations. And for today, anyway, I'm going to be the lead chair, and he's going to be the timekeeping chair, as well as popping in on many, many things. So let me just say on behalf of both of us, and I think for all of us, part of what we want to do today is sort of come out of here with enough understanding of people's ideas, preferences, views, priorities, and knowledge so that we can make a work plan that makes some sense. And I'll just say that one thing that makes this committee unique from all the other committees is we're picking up a project that is gone a certain distance. So at least for two of us on this committee, Jessica and me, and for 4 or 5, I guess 5 people on the board, we're sort of partway through a conversation. We've already spent sort of a year and a half on it. And then we're picking up you two as committee members and more people on the board who are coming in sort of midstream. Everybody knows something about it. I think people on this committee have already picked up more about it, but we have sort of a mixed understanding, knowledge base, as well as, I'm sure some level of diversity of opinions on things. So that's part of what we want to sort through today, and sort of hear from people about what they want to know more about, what they know plenty about, and what people are thinking about different things, so we can see what we want to spend time on. Okay. So to begin with, and I see Jacque is off for a moment. All right, so Darren, I want you to just help on the timekeeping, because one of my great weaknesses is I don't look at clocks when I'm in the middle of doing meetings, which creates a problem. All right, so I put on the side here, you've all got the agenda, right? Or everybody have it? Okay. Sort of how much time we'll spend on each thing, roughly. It doesn't mean we have to be to the minute, but it does come out just to an hour and a half. So let's just start. And so what, just to go through the agenda here, we're going to talk about review the framework. We're going to go through our charge, review the, discuss the context of the framework, how we got here, some timing issues on it, and then really talk about some of the key questions substantively, then how we want to, what we're thinking of in terms of public engagement, just to, again, just get stuff on the table. We're not going to resolve anything, but start to hear this, and then begin a discussion on timeline work plan. So with that, so I already went through number 1, and now we're on number 2. So, and is that fine as an agenda for everybody? I mean, I think everything else, all right, we'll do discussion on the others. All right. So on number 2, our charge. So our charge is, we started with really one thing, which was to complete our work on this framework, presumably to create a set of proposals for making it a better framework for judging quality and for getting assistance to schools and not being biased per the resolution we passed in the fall. And then second, and I cannot remember, I think it was one of you two raised at our retreat this idea of the innovative assessments. Okay, just, all right. That this was part of the original race to the top, was to allow states to develop innovative assessments. DC did not choose to do it, but there's now, I don't know, probably half a dozen states or so that have moved in this direction. And yeah, it's, Jessica raised it, it's totally fascinating, interesting. And while I don't think Aussie is at this point yet, it does seem to many of us, I think, that we can't be forever with Park because we're almost the only one left. So it makes sense to sort of start looking at these things, and it may help us also think about the framework. So I'm thinking of that as sort of a second big charge, but second sequentially. And then, so the question before we go on is, does anybody have anything they want to add, subtract to that idea of our charge. And then we would pick, as we move through those, we might well get other things. But oh, Jessica, you're so polite. You raised your hand. Jessica.
I'm trying. One question I have about sequentially, since we drafted our interim report, a lot, I think we'd all agree, has changed in terms of OSSI seeking a waiver for a second year of park, of a new administration coming on with likely renewed and different ideas about accountability. So I'm curious about, do you think it should be sequential, or is it possible to include the innovative assessments as part of the framework discussion? And I say that because I think some of what we've talked about to date as a board about the accountability framework is the kinds of information and data we wish we had that we don't have. And whether there's anything to be gleaned from some of the more innovative approaches to assessment that might inform a revised accountability framework. So that's my only push, is that I agree that there are two separate sort of pieces of the discussion, but might it be possible to consider them a little more intertwined rather than sequential?
So my initial reaction to that is that makes a lot of sense to me. Here's my one caveat. So I think you're absolutely right that the innovative assessments could help us think about these other, how we judge other, measure other parts of school quality. I totally agree with that. And totally relevant to the framework. The one piece I don't want to lose sight of, and I think we can intertwine them, is, and this really, I'm going to jump actually to the context on the timing, because that's relevant. So let me just jump to that and say this. So we are, this is sort of a unique avenue that we are on, I will say, as the state board. Traditionally, typically, up until recently, the board functioned in a pretty narrow space in terms of the statute that was originally passed that set up the board. And under that statute, for the range of issues that we have approval authority on, and OSSI has to bring us something for us to approve or disapprove. And the initial STAR framework was brought to the board for approval, disapproval. And as some of you know, it was controversial, and it got a mixed vote at the time, but it passed, it went forward. So in taking this on, we as a board are really saying, as we have now on some other things, so it's not just this, that we want to take some initiative on this to propose some changes. And then we want to encourage OSSI to work with us to make that happen. The reason I say all that is, to be fair to OSSI, ideally, we would want to get this to them. I'm thinking by June, and that's a discussion point for later on, but ideally we'd get them something serious by June-ish, because if they're going to make changes, they need to propose it, at least under current rules, and I wouldn't really expect this to change this quickly. Under current rules, they would have to get any proposed changes to the education department by something like March next year. And if we think about a sort of an iterative process where we're getting them something, maybe they're getting something back to us, or maybe we got to try to put some advocacy pressure on to say, there really is a need to revisit this. I want there to be a lot of time. And that's the only thing, is how to twine them so that, we can pick a time. Maybe it's June, maybe it's July, maybe people think it can be later. So that's the only thing I'd say, Jessica, but I like that idea a lot. And I can think of already one of the assessments that's interesting to me because of how it opens up some other quality issues. So with that, others?
I'm fine with that, the plan that you just laid out.
Jacque, are you back with us? All right. Does that sound right, Jessica? And
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense in the context of what we know now. I think I have a different view than a lot of folks on the board about what I think the department is going to do on a bunch of things. For instance, I think lots of folks seem to think that OSSI's going to get us a waiver, and I watch what's happening with every other state, and I'm like, I'd be real surprised if we got a waiver.
right.
So I also wonder about whether timing will change. But yes, I think in light of what we've got going, this all makes sense. One other thing I'd add is if we think about innovative assessments, I got the chance to look into them a little bit for a client project, the CSGA grants. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but basically it's like the innovative state assessment grants that went to like Texas and Louisiana. Massachusetts has one. There's a consortium that Nebraska is part of. There's a few that are consortium models, but a lot of them are their own state specific models. So one thing I just would want us to consider as a philosophical discussion point is if the reason for leaving Park is because we're the only ones left doing it, and we do something more innovative, we may still be the only ones doing it, right? We may be doing an assessment system that is not part of a consortium, unless OSSI decides it wants to jump in on a consortium with others to do this kind of work. Does that make sense?
Yes. My concern with being part of the Park Consortium, it's not pro or con for a consortium. It's more that it was developed as a consortium, and so much of it is about having all the governance, and the way it does its metrics is very much about being a consortium. And if nobody's left in it doing it that way, that's what I think is problematic, not being a consortium per se. But point taken. And let me also say, Darren has put together a memo on this that we will put out after this meeting, I think, so that we can start including that in this next discussion.
A memo on assessments?
Yes, on the innovative. Is that right, Darren? You want to say? I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but.
Sure. And just to add something to that, yeah, I just kind of like updated a little bit. But one thing I noticed is I can't remember which assessment it was, but the vendor was suing the state for not using it any longer. So that might be something to keep in mind if you go in that route.
Okay. All right.
Or what
So.
the red tape is with that.
All right. But so we'll get some summary descriptions. Is that right, Darren? Sort of what some of these start to look like in different places. And then Jessica, maybe based on that, maybe you have some other stuff sitting in some file that you want to throw in as well. All right. I wanted, Jacque, are you here? Well, so we wanted to just go through a little bit of the history. I actually just did go through some of it in terms of that there was OSSI brought us a proposal. There was a mixed voice on it. There was concerns about it. They became greater once the first star rating was given in, I think, December 2017, if I'm right. And there was also prior to that, actually, between the vote and the initial rating, there was the ESSA task force, which the board convened and Jacque was on, that didn't really revisit the framework, the STAR framework. I want to sort of think about these separately. But it did look at the report card. And I think Jacque was going to make some comments about that, but we can come back to that. But all right, so we're moving right along here, heading towards the substantive stuff. But so under 3, let me just put this back out there. We just went through it, but this timing idea, I want people to just think about it. If we try to do sort of a June-ish timeline for having proposals, and June, July, maybe before September, then we need to think about this in terms of educating ourselves, educating the board, having some proposals, bringing it to the community, rethinking it. And and we may iterate it in a different way, but that would sort of be the, and actually we're in March. So I actually think probably June really does not make sense, but July, September, I think could, if that's what we decide to do. And I guess my inclination would be to try not to go later than that. And I'm taking that as a, yeah, that works for now. So we'll go with that. All right. Okay. Y'all are very easy today. So 3B. And now let me just, because we're ahead, I've divided this into sort of thinking about what are the element, to sort of have a substantive discussion about what we want to fix, what are our priorities. So I talk about what do we want to include, what indicators of quality do we want to include in this rating, how, as part of that, how do we want to address the bias issues that we have identified, because there's multiple ways of doing it. Do we want to have a summative rating, or, as a lot of people raised last time, a dashboard, or part of what we've seen, I think, in what Darren said, that you can do both in different ways. So there's a way to combine those. And then how to better connect the framework to school improvement, because right now it really isn't. So that's what I have as the main question. So if anybody has another question to add, we can add it, subtract it. I see Jessica's hand.
Yeah, so Ruth, I just want to go back to the June, September with everything you just mentioned. So I was looking, I hadn't realized we were going from 3A to 3B. I thought we were still within the sub-bullets on 3A. So you mentioned research, draft, engagement, recommendations complete. One question I have about timing is the engagement piece. And I say that because the reopening task force group is talking about doing some engagement. We're talking about focus groups, et cetera. The summer in town feels like there's going to be a lot going on with out of school time programs, summer programming, plans for the fall. How are you envisioning the kind of engagement we want to do? Are we thinking about a survey? Are we thinking about ward-based meetings? Because I think that may affect timing, as well as the scope of how many folks we want to engage would seem to be important as we design a plan for how to time it out.
I have no answer to that. I figured that is really something we would spend some time on before we end this meeting. I mean, I have thoughts, but nothing firm. And the other idea, and maybe John Paul can speak to this also, is that there may be other board projects that also want community engagement. And so we may merge them in some way. We had talked about possibly doing a parent poll that could take in questions from a lot of different committees as one specific conversation the admin committee had, but there also might be other issues that could be blended together for ward meetings. So I don't know. I'm totally open on it.
I think you're exactly right, Ruth. I mean, I think one of the things that I would encourage the committee to do is to put together a work plan based on, best thoughts right now within this committee, and then the sort of details about what may need to be combined, moved, changed, whatever, we can talk about as the full board, right? Because to Jessica's point, there are other committees that are going to be proposing things around the same time, and that time from now until June is busy, and we're also going to be short-staffed during that period. So if it is something that is a big priority for the board that we need, to do and have lots of staff support for it, we may not be able to do other projects. And I think that's one of the things that the full board needs to consider. But I think having the potential idea dates of June is an appropriate thing for the committee to do to have that conversation.
Okay.
And I'm sorry I missed some parts because I was dealing with something else that
You lost your job as timekeeper, I want to say.
I see, and I apologize. I want to be back on it. But the thing is that is there a set time that we must report out from this committee that this needs to be done? That's per the ESSA that we said ESSA requires us to look at it and reevaluate it. Was there a time that was set?
Yes, so I talked about that. So all of this, and as we have discussed, we're to some extent making this up as we go, because what we're trying to do is put ourselves in a position of saying, we want this to be looked at and fixed and revised, that we're sort of taking initiative where the statute doesn't give it to us.
Okay.
So what I was suggesting is, at least as the rules stand now, if OSSI was to make a proposed change in the STAR framework, they would need to get their proposed changes to the Ed Department next March, so 1 year.
Okay.
So if we want to give them proposals, ask them to, take this on to propose some revisions, and potentially, we may need to talk to other people about it, whether it's our own people or council people, to try to build some support for this. And give OSSI the time they need to do it well, and to have the right kind of back and forth. Ideally, I think it would be June, July. It's already March, so I sort of already moved to maybe September, but I don't think we want to go beyond that for sure. And if we could do it by the summer, that's to the good.
Okay. And Jessica, you were saying in response to that, what was the debate?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we think about what engagement looks like, and that we make sure our plan includes details on what it looks like in an ideal world, like how we would want it designed and how we would want it timed.
Okay.
So that when we do, to John Paul's good point, connect as a whole board,
Right.
we can either figure out if it combines with other questions we want to ask of the public, and if there are ways to sort of consolidate into a single questionnaire, for instance.
Okay.
Ruth, one other question I had on that front is just, I know a while ago we had heard from OSSI that there was not much appetite to make change. Have you or Jacque had any updated conversations, or have Zachary and Emily as part of their, I haven't seen it in the leadership readout, so that's why I was wondering, has there been any more conversation with OSSI to try to gauge whether that's shifted at all?
Not to my knowledge. I'm sure not on the part of me or Jacque, and I don't think it's come up.
So let me reframe that just real quick, not
Okay.
to cut you off, Ruth. In my conversation, I had conversations with our superintendent, our interim superintendent, as part of my initial coming in as a board member. And at that time, Jessica, just to be clear, I did tell her this was one of the subject matters that I wanted to address, and she seemed open at that particular time to address it. I told her quite succinctly that I had campaigned on it, that I had talked to individuals and what I was hearing from parents. And that's the only feedback that I've had with her in these interim couple of months that I've been on the board. But that was my initial statement. And that's maybe going on about a month ago now, that I had like an hour conversation with her one-on-one to tell her these are my interest items, and the STAR framework is one of those issues.
Awesome, that's helpful. Thanks, Jacque.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think one thing for us to think about is there's going to be a new superintendent. So there's going to be an opportunity to have some conversation about this. So. All right. Okay, so we are now plunging into 3B, which is really to talk about what it's sort of as individuals, what is our interest here? What are we most concerned about? What are our ideas about changing it? Yeah.
And for me, as we dig into this particular area, I just wanted to make clear, like my interest and where it arises from is like hearing, and I'm sure you have these same constituents, Jessica, because we deal with the same people a lot of times. A lot of the teachers and parents and school leaders in particular who said, okay, I feel like the efforts that's going into this does not truly reflect on the work that's being done. And I know we're going through COVID, and it gives us kind of relief, kind of a pressure release, because we're not going to be doing them. But the biggest thing before everything hit was that we need something that speaks to the quality of the work that's being done. So it's not an indictment on a school with a STAR, but more so of an indicator. of where there needs to be help and when it could point to equity. That was more so the conversations that I was having. And I can say, for me and the people that I talked to, it was almost a consensus, like, we need to do something. We don't know what, but we need to do something in this area. I don't want to come back from something and my school continuously gets this low rating and I'm looking like an ass, like I'm not doing anything at my particular school. So I need you guys to address it. That's basically what they were saying to me.
I appreciate that, Jacque. And yeah, I think just kind of watching things, some things that stick with me, just the growth mindset about how we could include. I know there's mention a lot of this I'm gonna have to get caught up with, because when Aussie was building out the report card and had talked about using standardized tests, I had tuned out because I was just like, I felt like we were going back to I tuned out because I didn't want to be a part of the work that was already. I was kind of, we have certain information that's 20 years in the making and we're still going to do the same old thing. So a piece of my work on my end is going to be just kind of getting caught up, like what was the work done around accountability, et cetera. But I think like looking at growth would be good, because some things that stick with me talking to the constituents, similar to you, Jacque, is like, some people, raise, what is it truly the quality of the school and the education offerings, or is it, socioeconomics, where there's certain things that students are privy to in their homes and schools are just kind of getting rated, or the benefits of that. I also would love for us to kind of look at, I appreciate, and part of the work that I was a part of was looking at the dashboard that they built around childcare. And I think there was some merit to the approach that they had there, in regards to like, what are the things on the K through 12 side that families are looking for in regards to education. And then the last piece of it was, I have to think about the mom who participated in our Easter River hearing. When I asked her about a school report card, she said, no, I didn't. She said, I didn't look up that information. I went by word of mouth. So I'm just curious, and it kind of like, it was a good perspective for me, because I'm like, we're doing all this, back and forth about it. And I think definitely it's worth, looking at these measures, but it's just also like, it was cool. It was just interesting to hear a parent be like, yeah, I went to the Ed Fest. I talked to other parents, I talked to schools, and that's how I made my decision. I wasn't tinkering around in these websites. That kind of helped. It gave me an interesting perspective about, energy towards some of this. So, but I know that the schools, are thinking about more of the, what do their measures look like and what does their dashboard appear to be? So that's
and very quick, and I don't want to copy off of that, if I may interject right here, because what you said, Carlene, is very relevant. Because when you're talking to parents, when you're talking to constituency that are east of the river, okay, you're more so talking to school leaders and teachers who are up on the report card. When you go west of the river, you're talking to parents who actually navigated it a lot more. And I saw these differences in conversations, again, while I was campaigning. There are those who really look at the report card and the star means a whole bunch to them, right? In the sense of parents. And that's how they evaluate their schools and stuff like that. You come east of the river, the report card was not the big thing. It's more of a conversation and everything. But it was very important to the principals that I talked to at Henley, at Garfield, at all these other schools that received low stars, 2 and 1, where they're like, look, I got this high percentage of at-risk students. I'm at 80, 90%, and I'm getting this low star, and I'm going to lose more people because you're going to give me 1 star, and I'm going to lose more funding. So you had these differences in conversations, but they're all consistent in the sense of, we need to use it. It needs to be able to speak to both constituencies and be relevant and answer the questions that we need to. And it should go to growth. I believe the biggest thing is, how much is a child growing, and where can we see good happening at all schools and becoming a quality school, was kind of like the conversations that I were having. And they felt like, look, this can't go on forever, where we're just looking bad, or one side looks good and one side doesn't. We need to fix that part, because it shows inequities even more. It doesn't show where the help needs to be done.
So I want to offer a slightly different perspective. Coming from, the star rating is a state accountability system. Mm-hmm. It has become, and it's been marketed as a parent tool, right? That like part of the reason we have a consolidated rating is to make it easy for parents to understand.
Right.
There's two things I think at play there. One is I have pretty strong thoughts of how I think a state accountability system should be designed and what should go in there. Yeah, so we have good days and bad days over here with this dog. He hasn't thrown up since Wednesday night, which I could have done without during the
I
meeting.
love Theo.
But today seems to be a better day. I think the sunshine is helping him. Thank you for asking. The second thing is that if we don't use it as a parent information tool, if we tried to separate out and say, this is a state accountability system, and we want to do other things to help parents understand school quality, I think there's a question of how easy is it for the state to do that versus how easy is it for someone else to do that? And a lot of the reports on parent summative rating use tools talk about sort of racial bias in them. So like where before the star rating, we had great schools, and great schools was widely used. It's still used on real estate sites all the time. And I think there's a lot of people who are concerned about letting a third party be the arbiter of parent information about schools. So one question I have is, are we looking at this framework purely from a state accountability standpoint? Or are we looking at it from both state accountability and parent information? And then the second thing is around what both you, Carlene, and Jacque were talking about with like parent word of mouth. I think in Ward 6, the stars carry a lot of weight in parent word of mouth, but so too do other facets of a school. And I'm not sure I feel better about parent word of mouth than I do about a star rating, because there are things that parents begin to talk about or say about individual schools and who they believe that school is for and who it is not for. And in those cases, I wonder if the stars and an accountability system could help dispel some of what is currently part of word of mouth. So for instance, I think of, there's one Ward 6 school that has a very large early childhood program. It's the largest in the ward. And if you looked at that school's star, it's not a high star school. But if you look at its class data, it gets great ratings for its early childhood program. So that's only a piece of the school report card and not all of the stars. So I think the critical question for me is like, when we talk about making recommendations for revisions, are we doing this from the basis of what we think accountability should be for? And if it's that, I'm with all of you on the fact that like we need to make sure that the accountability tool gives schools credit for what they're doing with whom they're doing it, so that it is not, to Ruth's point, replicating some of the bias we know is true in some of the metrics. But if we're looking at it to try to make it a better parent information tool, I think that adds on another set of layers of questions.
And I would agree with you, Jessica, in the sense of it has to be an accountability tool. Being a person who lives east of the river and wants schools to do better, I don't want it to be a total indictment where every school, because they're not getting the resources that they need, and I know these school leaders, where they're indicted because to no fault of their own, and because of a system that we have, systemic inequities and things like that, they're being rated on an accountability aspect that they have no control of actually improving on. So it's one thing to say, yes, we're going to use it as an accountability, but how do we make sure that it's also points to the fact that this is where schools need help? These are the areas that we're going to improve in, without making an indictment on those particular principles and those people. So I agree that it needs to be an accountability, because you're holding it accountable to communities that don't have schools that are performing up to the level that we would like them to perform to. We don't want all the schools that are performing negatively east of the river in Ward 8 and 7 and some in 5, and then the ones in 3 and other areas, sorry, Ruth, are performing at another level and they're getting better stars. That just increases the inequity of the whole conversation. So I definitely hear you on that. I want it to be an accountability, but I also want it to be an educational tool on how parents go about looking at schools and holding them accountable at the same time. I think there's a difference in just word of mouth and parents being educated on how to hold a school accountable. And I think that's really the tenor and what they were trying to get out of this, proposing this, and the whole ESSA thing, was to allow parents to how to hold schools accountable. So it's there on both sides. It's not just informational. It's about teaching parents how to hold schools accountable for the things that they should be doing, if that makes sense to you. That's where I am as a person.
Mhm. Yeah, I like I think one of the webinars we sat in on, I think that was from NASB, I can't remember, was mentioning something about like there's just certain information that should be just available either to states and administrators, and the state take that information and make the adjustments that it needs to make. Similar, and I guess in the early childhood workspace where, you know, the dashboard had certain things to help parents navigate and make decisions. Like, you know, does this center have, you know, like multiple languages, or what languages do the staff speak, like things that would actually help parents. But then on our end, we were looking at certain data in regards to what the quality indicators for early childhood were, and we're saying, wait a minute, like we need to help, you know, this center do this or plan around this, or more funds need to go here, or why are, you know, we're seeing certain matrix in Ward 8 or 7, you know, about, you know, just certain things, versus saying like, hey parents, you know, you know, like the school, like making the school, I mean, yes, the center took accountability for some, but we also on our end, it was the state agency was like, okay, well, maybe we need to figure out how to make people like, you know, successful in whatever those quality indicators were, whether it be like, okay, if they're, I think it was a class, or maybe, I don't know, you know, if it's, they don't have enough books to get a good rating on class, then we need to make sure that, hey, we need to put, you know, instructional materials so that they actually have an opportunity to score high. So I think I agree with both points. Like, how do we encourage, or are there other states that are using this data instead of like putting it out on the front end, using it more on the back end about like, this is what we need as a government take accountability for.
And a reminder that we have a rating framework. It's called a PMF on the charter side. So, you know, having ratings and stuff like that is nothing new to the District of Columbia. One side has been doing it since they instituted charters, you know, basically in a roundabout way for their renewals and stuff like that. And there's a certain amount of accountability that charters have to do in order to stay in business, where they're once they get to 1 star, they're in jeopardy of losing, you know, their charter. We're not trying to go there. And I know there's some fears that low ratings will justify closing schools, which is some of the fears of some of the school side individuals. We're not trying to go there, and we don't want that narrative to get hold. But at the same time, we do want to hold schools accountable to the people that they serve, just like charters do, in a roundabout way. And it's not just as simple as you get this star and that's what people look at. You know, so that's the whole, for me, that's the dynamic. Holding people accountable, educating the public on what accountability looks like to your neighborhood of your school, but also making sure that those schools have the support to improve. You know, that's a part of the PMF. They tell you where you're lacking, where you need to improve, and where you need to focus at. And then they try to support you in that. And that's how charter schools move from 2 stars to 3 stars and getting better. That's kind of like my thought process and my foundation of conversation.
All right, I'm gonna jump in and respond. So, I mean, part of what I'm hearing that makes sense to me, I'm gonna put it, I think, a little differently, but if we can get to a place where the accountability, the federal accountability, the city accountability is pretty similar to what parents are looking for, that's a plus. It doesn't mean that there might not be other things that parents are looking for, but insofar as the accountability, I mean, for example, I think part of what I think everybody is saying is what everybody wants to know. Parents want to know it, and the accountability system wants to know it. Are you growing kids? Are you growing them at good rates? That is sort of fundamental to both pieces, the accountability side, you know, to use that language, and the family side. So to me, you know, part of, you know, one big factor in the accountability system should be how much are, you know, how are we growing our kids academically? You can also do, and OSSE has done this, but in a small way, for your other pieces, like if attendance is something that you're going to include, growth on attendance can also be a way of doing it, or whatever your important things are. In fact, Josh Boots had this idea at one point. It is, he may do it to some extent with his bold performance schools, I can't remember, but you give schools an opportunity, can either use their kind of their performance or their growth. so that if your kids all start high and they don't fall, that's your level. But if they start low and you grow them a lot, that's sort of your accountability point. And that's a way to think about, parents want to know that, the accountability system wants to know that, and it gives you some notions about what kind of assistance people need.
And,
So
I know Jessica has some comments on that, and I see your point, but I would say it's not a plus. It is actually the point, is the accountability aspect, because it's designed to be an accountability thing. When I read the S of stuff, the work, it's there to be an accountability to hold schools accountable for providing a quality education for families. And as we talked about equity, specifically in the task force, was that we were going to improve that level of quality schools inside of communities that had been, if we want to use the term, underserved. That, you had this dichotomy of great schools in this community and horrible schools over here. Why couldn't we bring them up and hold them all accountable, a system that holds them accountable the same way, but it continuously improves those schools that had been underserved, so to speak. So it is the main point. It is about holding schools accountable, because at the end of the day, the person, our customer, is the parent who entrusts us with their children's education. So we are holding ourselves as board representatives and everything else accountable for making sure that they have a great school in their community, hopefully, that service them correctly, that we hold to the same standard across our city, across our district.
So Ruth, what I noted in the chat, that one of the things I think I disagree with is that I'm not sure we want an accountability system built around what parents want. And I say that because I think we would agree that a school's job is to grow whatever child walks through its door at least one grade level. Like that's the basic expectation, is like, you get my child for a year, your job is to grow them from where they walk in at least 1 year in that year. But we know that our children walk into buildings with different starting points. However, in my conversations with parents, I absolutely have parents who are like, of course I need to know proficiency. I want to know how many kids at that school are doing work at grade level, because I want my kid to be doing work at grade level. And if they're not doing work at grade level, I don't want my kid to go to that school. I'm not sure that's a great way to build an accountability system, given what we know about where kids start. So I just want to be careful on trying to equate an accountability system with what parents care about. Because I think a second example I would offer is, I know there's a lot of interest on the board in talking about climate, school culture, non-academic factors in schools. Different families choose different kinds of school cultures for different reasons. And I'll speak only from my own experience. I'm one of two children in a family. My brother went to very rigid disciplinary school environments. That was what my family felt was best for him. It wasn't what was best for me. But I think we'd have parents who would look at school climate and see concerns over, like, a school with rigid discipline might be viewed as good, or it might be viewed as bad. And that's very much going to depend on a parent's opinion. So I just want to be careful that we don't design an accountability system that is what parents want, but rather we design an accountability system that says, what does the state believe a quality school should be doing? And how does our accountability system tell us whether it is or it is not doing that, as well as give us data on how the school would need to improve in order to meet the state's expectations.
And I'm okay with it.
What about
I say we need to define what accountability is going to mean for this particular work.
I'm thinking what you just said, Representative Jessica, about like, what do parents want? What about, like, what's useful? Any like thoughts on that? Because I get what you're saying. Like, what somebody might want could be, it could be it could be anything, like, I don't know, maybe a sports car. On you, Carlene. Versus, like, what is truly useful, and, like, maybe I just need to know what schools are around me. I mean, you guys can help me too about more of that, but, like, if I'm trying to avoid, people who don't speak, like, literally, we hear a lot of our English language learners are families who, come into barriers in schools, and, there's no one in my building who can speak the language that helps support me best. Or maybe there's a certain program that's really unique to that school, is like, useful versus like, want, could be a lot of things that I agree could be detrimental.
Yeah. I think the report card is where we do all this, right? We put a lot of information in the report card that helps parents understand schools on paper. And I guess I say that because I think there are lots of parents, and I would be one of them, who would want to go talk to people from the school. So I would probably find EdFest far more helpful for the way I make decisions than the paper tool would be. But there are parents who either can't make that time or feel most comfortable reading up before they go. So I think there's paper we would want to say, what's all the stuff we want families to know and have access to information about? But then the STAR, or whatever we propose as an alternative, is the accountability. It's what does the state say a quality school has to have and do and be achieving? And that's in that accountability calculation.
So let me suggest this. The way we're talking about it, what do parents want versus what does the state want? Well, for the moment, we're being the state, right? It's sort of like, what do we think are the right things to include in this formula? And I guess we have different ideas about what parents want or don't want, and that's fine. Why don't we move to the question of, so what are the elements of quality that we do think should be in this accountability plan? And I think we've heard growth, and I would say more growth.
Ruth, can I offer a potential suggestion? I apologize for interrupting you. I do want to make sure that the committee feels comfortable with having, like, what will be in the work plan for, because we'll need to have the full information for that by kind of the end of the month. So I want to make sure that we're using all of the time to be conscious of both the questions that you're asking about what should we be looking for, but also how are we going to look for that, with mentioning the information that you talked about earlier, like how are we going to gain from stakeholders, including parents and teachers and principals, right?
I want to answer in this way. I want to save the end of it for a discussion of the engagement. The thing about our work plan, to me, it comes out of this discussion. I mean, trying to understand what people are interested in, what they feel they know about, don't know about. That's part of what the work plan is. And then based on that, we'll develop a work plan proposal. And then we have another meeting before the end of the month that we will refine it at. So I don't want to cut short the discussion. I don't think, unless if other people want to, we can, but it seems to me that's really important to know sort of where people are on this. If anybody wants to.
I just want to ask about Carlene's question, because I think it's a good clarifying question. Like, are we talking about changes to the report card, or are we talking about changes to the STAR? I think we're talking about changes to the STAR.
I think we are talking about changes to the STAR primarily, but I don't think that precludes us also saying some things like, and that would be well complemented by adding this, this, and this into the report card.
Okay.
I could grow out of it. I don't think we should limit ourselves, but mainly it's about either what goes into the STAR or what replaces the STAR, to me.
Is there also, and this is to Jacque's point from earlier, is there also then the potential for the committee to recommend, and through the committee, this full state board, to recommend other things to support schools, additional funding or particular programs or something? And I think this is one of the drawbacks of our current system, right? Is that we provide the federal TSCS money, right, to the schools at the lowest 5%, but we don't have a statewide plan of really what to do with them, other than having the school, do a restructuring plan, right? So what do we think that should include as well? May also be something that the committee might want to discuss.
And I love that, Jean Paul, for the sense of when I go through the report cards and start pulling up schools by rather wards and things like that, you start seeing trends, which the report card does pull out. You start seeing percentages of at-risk students. You start seeing, because it does tell you how much of a budget a school is spending per child. And I can tell you, even though it's allocated equally, how they spend that money and stuff like that, and what schools are getting. Like, I saw differences of 18,000 to 22,000 per pupil. And we're all in the same system, but it shows on the report card because of differences in at-risk students, and are they Title I and things like that. You start seeing the differences. So in holding a school accountable, which I think is our charter here, our charge here, is we need to look at how we're doing that, how we're holding them accountable, but also how is that money being used to make sure that they improve the quality of that school, is what I'm trying to say in this thing. And that will dictate the other things that we have in there, whether it's a star or whatever the case may be.
All right, so here's what I'd like to do. Under this, what do we have? We have, we're at just about 2. We want to save the last 10 minutes at least for the engagement. So we have at most 20 to just run through. There's sort of 3 parts of this. 1, what are the elements of school quality that we want to propose to measure, include in the framework, maybe that aren't there or that are there? Do we want to have a summative rating or a dashboard or both? How can we better connect the framework to school improvement? So can we do, is it useful to go through sort of a lightning round to just sort of throw out some things? I can start just on the first one. What elements of school quality do we propose to include? And I guess my lens is, what do we think makes for a quality school? Because that's what we want to ultimately judge. Is this be able to say, this is a school that is of high quality, or this is a school that hasn't quite gotten there, and that can, and we can also use it to sort of say, and these are the ways it could improve, because that connects to the framework. So I would say growth in scores is huge. I would, and I'm going to put this a different way. I also want to think about it as, what are the things that we measure that then prod schools to do things either in a good or not good way? So one thing that I think there was pretty broad support on, and also hard to figure out how to do, is well-rounded education. So I think a good school is one that has well-rounded education. And part of what's interesting to me about the innovative assessments is some of them are designed to sort of pick that up. So that's one I think is important. I do think school climate is important. There's parts of school climate that I think are about what parents want, to sort of Jessica's point that they may be very individualistic for their own kids, but there's parts of it that I think are very kind of research-based, that if you have this, you're pretty likely to be on a good track, and if you don't, you're not. For example, schools where kids, if you ask kids, do you feel academically challenged? That has a lot of connection to growth and other things, is one of them. Another one is this idea that, is there an adult that you feel comfortable going to? Some of the questions on bullying. So there's sort of a subset of school quality indicators that have been identified. I'm thinking sort of the University of Chicago research as really leading to, or running parallel with, broader improvement. So I will just throw those out as some initial things that I think should be part of it.
I'm thinking something along the lines of like learning environments, because I think that's something that could help the city prioritize, like what spaces. I know we have the PACE, but what spaces need enhancements. Also, just it also can be tackled through the school too, about certain things the school has the ability to restructure on their own. Learning materials, again, both sides of, is the government providing opportunities, or high quality materials? I know some things probably the school has to pick, but our schools resource adequately to get those materials. And then quality of instruction would be my elements of quality. A few of them.
I'm going to raise one question, then go to whoever wants to go next. And this has always been an issue, is when you talk about the pace and you talk about the space and the resources.
And I forgot paces for DCPS. So I apologize for that.
Well, but the point is, it's the city needs to be held accountable, right? It's not the schools that are responsible for the fact that they do or don't have a good facility, or that they do or don't have the adequate resources. So how do we hold the city accountable for the things that the city needs to be accountable for? And I will say that's perplexing, is how do we do that? Do we do that with this instrument somehow as sort of a second piece of it, or is it a whole other project? I'm just putting that as a parallel question because it keeps coming up.
Going to some things that we heard from folks we invited to come speak to us about modifications to the STAR, there was a suggestion that we include different subgroups, including like students who have been in the school for 3 years, so that you're looking at not just how you do with the students who walk in your door annually, but how you do with students who've been with your LEA and in your school for a time period. There have also been suggestions that we take some different cuts at growth, so that it not just be about the amount of growth that we include in the model, but also how we measure growth, and that we think differently about that. I am curious, there's a report out, I think, I have to remember who put it out, about the use of school quality reviews in addition to quantitative metrics. So like Jacque was talking about, PCSB has their PMF, but they also have an SQR, the school quality review, where they actually have outside reviewers come in and walk the building and interview staff and do that. And I think they do that every 3 years, might be every 5. I can't remember if it's on the same cycle. Yeah, so the PMF is annual, the SQR is 3 years, and renewals every 5 years. It might make sense to contemplate something like that. Is there a qualitative companion to the quantitative aspects of our accountability system? If we're going to shoot for the moon, I would wholeheartedly embrace that.
I'm a big fan of the school quality review somehow. So that could be a real. While Jacque is thinking, I'm just going to go back to the resolution as well, just to look at it.
And I'm really think I'm listening at this particular point. I agree with a lot of things that's being said and how the conversation is headed, the direction. So I'm good.
I will say one of the, back on this growth thing, that you can use growth to measure lots of things. Why are you guys laughing?
Because I realized when I put my knee up that like my bright orange tights are suddenly in view, and I'm like, always on brand.
My tights are very muted.
I was saying it was that levity moment we all needed when she typed that in there.
Oh, see, I can't, I don't have my chat right in front of me, so I don't see this often. All right. So we have to measure high school graduation rate. But high school graduation rate in some ways is very similar to proficiency scores, which is some schools have enrollments that they enter very much on the path to high school graduation, and they're going to end up with high school graduation rates. And others, the work that has to be done to raise students to that high school graduation rate is much more. So I am leery of having, insofar as we're talking about the quality of a school, and I want to be really clear about that. Insofar as we're talking about the quality of a school, I'm reluctant to say a school that has to take students from here to there and a school that has to take students from here to there, they both get there, that they're of equal quality. That doesn't seem legitimate. But you can use the growth and you can say, how much have you grown your high school rate? Seems to me that potentially is something that you could put in there, just like growth in your test score, growth in your high school graduation rate. So I want to raise that. Another one that, and actually this might be an example, well, the whole re-enrollment rate issue. The re-enrollment rate, I think, has a lot to do with parent interest, going back to sort of Jessica's point. And it is something, and I know it's, well, Jacque, you can talk more. I feel like it's very important to people in the charter world, and I want to understand that better, and whether or not it's how important it is. Because we did have various people talk to us about the various different ways in which re-enrollment had a built-in bias, partly because many of the people who end up leaving, they're not leaving because the school is bad, they're leaving because of housing transients of some sort. And there was another piece to that, which I can't now remember. So I want to throw both those out.
Ruth, one thing I wonder about that, you're raising here, which I think is again, philosophical question, but important to our technical decisions. Under the law, a child who is homeless has the ability to continue enrollment at their school, no matter where they move. However, we know practically it's really difficult for families to maintain that transit, especially if the city's other systems aren't working to help them. The question I have is, do we adjust the accountability system to accommodate problems in city systems? Or do we say, we think this matters. We think re-enrollment is important because we want families to find a school that they are consistently happy with. And if your school is a school that is not seeing high re-enrollment year over year, that's an indicator that you're not making students and families feel comfortable, like this is a place where they want to stay, where they feel welcomed and safe. I would hate to see us say, well, we know turnover is happening because all these other city systems are poor, so let's just take it out of the accountability system if we believe it matters to some indicator of how safe and welcoming a school is to the children who attend it.
I mean, I guess it is a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, the one factual thing I'd say is, to some extent, it's not within the system, it's people leaving DC. And so it's not that you could fix DC. There's some part of it that's not a failure of DC because people are leaving the area. But to some extent, what you're saying is absolutely right. And I guess, just to take your side on this for a moment, I guess the other piece of that is, there's always been sort of this concern, you don't want charters to be in a position of pushing people out. And certainly the re-enrollment is a way of discouraging that. So I have a lot of sympathy to that too. It certainly did. I think it was the highest, except for the proficiency rates. We can look of the indicators that were related to at-risk status, but I'm going to look.
Yeah, and I think that's right, Ruth. One thing I wonder about, and again, I don't mean to be a pain here, but I think what we know about children who are considered in that category of designated at risk is that they have significant needs, and that the correlation between their at-risk status and student mobility might be about them and their family. Maybe it's moving housing. Maybe it's not about them and their family. Maybe it's about the way the school relates to them and the support they provide or fail to provide. And in that case, I want a school to be doing what it can to serve the children who walk through its door. And so I would want to see at-risk children continuing to re-enroll and holding schools accountable for that. Because if your at-risk students are not re-enrolling, it sort of says well, are you not giving them what they need? Are you making them feel unwelcome? Are you suggesting that you're not a school that's interested in serving them?
But on the flip side of that, do you have the resources to serve them at the same time? Because I know kids who are not re-enrolling and they're not getting the support, the schools in Henley in particular. I know Dr. Reagan's there. She's getting sometimes level 5. She doesn't have the capacity to serve a level 5. She up to 4, but the school system puts them there because they're the closest in the area and that's their by right school, and she doesn't have the resources to do that. So the minute that they can disenroll or something like that, or find a school that has the resources to service them, they're gone. Because she's never been given the resources to service those children. And I've had those conversations with her at Henley.
I'm also thinking, and just put on the table just a thought. I'm thinking about it's probably a lot of churn in the preschool years, because people take a seat because they want the pre-K 3 or 4 seat, but then they end up finding one closer to home. Or if you're in special education, they might get a seat in a DCPS school just to get their services, which shouldn't be happening. But anyway, get their services, and then they switch over to maybe like a charter that they want, or again, a DCPS school that's closer to home, or they have to switch because somehow the classroom programming has changed. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what are some of the factors that cause the churn that are beyond families not being happy? Well, I mean, I think it still ties the same thing of like this, the system has caused this somehow, but thinking about what population might be starting to, you know, make things go in flux.
Yeah.
I'm guilty. We're guilty of that, Carlene. Just so you know, I'm gonna raise my hand and say we're guilty of that. Started at KIP for preschool, went over to Ludlow Taylor as soon as we could get in.
One thing I wonder about too is like, and I struggle with this from a like accountability standpoint. I think something that has to change as well, that's beyond the indicators, is the way this framework is messaged. Because I think that a lot of teachers and principals take it personally, that like, I failed to do this. I am the one who is at fault here. And
That's
I think
you're right.
the question here, because, and Carlene, you put it really nicely, like the system is failing. Well, ideally, this should be holding the system accountable. So like, if Principal Riggins isn't getting what she needs from her LEA, the LEA has to be held accountable. And that's what the accountability system is supposed to be doing. This isn't about Principal Riggins, and it's not her fault.
That part.
So how do we think about the system in that regard?
So how, this is something that we kept coming back to last time, is how you distinguish those, right? Because these are school accountability ratings, right? So how can we bring into this or distinguish or add something that is a system or LEA responsibility? Because these are school accountability. That's what it is. It's a school rating. So how do you not hold them responsible? How do you hold the LEA responsible for what the LEA is responsible for and not the school?
That's the great question right there, is that it's hard to hold an individual in a family responsible if the whole family's not supporting that particular individual. So there's some responsibility of the LEA to make whole or put them on an equal footing or equitable footing with the other members in the family. And that's the part that a lot of people come to me about as we try to design this to be equitable, and keep using that word, is how do we hold the LEA and the individual accountable?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And I think that's one we should tackle as part of our work plan, is what about this accountability system? If we're thinking about making proposals for how to improve it, how do we look at the system, the LEA level accountability and the school level accountability? And this is trickier for DCPS overall because it's the largest LEA and it has the greatest diversity of students and school populations within it. I can't think of a single charter LEA that has any sort of diversity in the groups served in the way that DCPS does. Like if you look at Center City, or you look at KIP, or you look at Friendship, the population within the LEA is much more homogeneous than DCPS is.
Right. For the most part, it is. We're 90-something% African American at KIP, and the same thing with Center City or any other place. They're in the 90s as far as African Americans that they.
Right. Center City's like African American, Latino. It's got multiple ELLs in both Amharic and Spanish, but most of its kids are.
You know, we have hardly any Asian kids or Hispanic. We don't have any of that.
All right, people. We are at 2:15. I want to take 5 minutes and just like we just did, do sort of a lightning round on dashboards and people's thoughts about, do you like a dashboard? What should be in a dashboard? What should we want to look for in a dashboard as part of this? And because we only have 5 minutes, you can also throw into that specific things you want to know more about as we move forward on this. And then we're going to switch to engagement.
If there are any reading resources that I should kind of be doing homework on, just shoot them my way. Like I need to get a little caught up on some things.
And can I say one thing on that? Darren has been setting up a SharePoint on this. that we can all go to and see everything. And one thing, Darren, that I don't know where it is, there was something we put together. What?
I was just saying, yay, Darren, because Darren has been pumping out information for me. So, yay, Darren.
No, we put together, and originally it was part of the initial interim report, was all the different memos that this staff had written, because we have a slew of them. I mean, I think there were like 8 or 10 of them. And if they could all go there, then we'd have kind of everything in one place. And that will help you, Carlene. I'm also happy. I can also suggest which makes sense, but together they are a pretty good overview. All right, who wants to jump in on dashboard, summative, what to include in dashboards, et cetera, et cetera?
So I put my comment in the chat. I am not a fan of dashboards as an accountability tool. I think it's great for school information, and I think that's what the DC School Report Card does. Could there be tweaks to it so that it was easier to compare? That'd be cool. But I think for an accountability tool, still having some way to categorize overall, this school needs support, overall, this school falls here, that is important to me in an accountability tool.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I hear you, Jessica. And then I think about what, certain constituencies, there's different constituencies throughout the whole city, what they need to see. So while I may not be a fan as using it for accountability itself, I also think about the constituency that needs to see that type of information. And I'll just use myself and my own family. Me and my wife, we're going to look at a dashboard of a school to kind of gauge it. And that's how we're going to also actually hold it accountable, just so when I'm thinking about my son and my daughter, is the school culture this, is whatever, we're going to go through those things and see what that looks like. We're going to also look at things, the demographics. We do look at demographics. A lot of African-American families do like, I want some diversity in the school that I attend. They've been attending schools that are predominantly, since we're east of the river, that are predominantly Black. And I would love for them to go to a school that we're going to look at that stuff. So that dashboard serves that purpose of those families and trying to hold them accountable and moving and stuff like that. It may not actually be accountability, but that's what they look at.
And it incentivizes people to care about those things because it's going to be so public, which is part of what I like. Carlene?
Yeah.
Do you know we're talking? Oh, of course you know what we're talking about because you had it in the early childhood. So.
Yeah, I'm just listening at the moment.
The one case I think I'd make 2 cases for dashboard. One is, as I just said, that it makes very public the ratings, so to speak, or degrees of quality, unspecific quality indicators that we hear and the state and parents think are important, or the parents. The other thing it does that I think is really important is, the way when you have the single summative score like our STAR score, what I find very hard about it is basically, and I don't mean this in a negative way, this is the reality, is some set of people decided that this score is going to be worth, 40% of it will be growth, and 30% of it will be proficiency, and 20% of it will be this, and 10% of it will be this, and 8% of it. And somebody else is making that decision and you can't see it. And part of what you get with the dashboard is you pull it apart, and I think this is what Jacque means by the accountability, is that you pull it apart and there it is for everybody to see. That is the accountability. I can see that this is a place where children feel valued. I can see that this is a place with high academic growth. I can see that this is a place where the attendance has risen. I can see it's a place that still has a chronic absenteeism problem, but it's gotten better. Whatever it is we decide to show, it's there and you see it.
So I just want to make a funny sort of side comment. Everything both of you just said is a huge argument for parent school choice. It's an argument for parents to decide what matters to them and to choose their school accordingly. I think that's a funny argument in light of the other argument we're making about school accountability tools, which is that they should be holding schools to some common standard of excellence that ensures equity for all students to get the same thing. So that's why I think a dashboard is a really good place to inform parents and help them make choices about schools. But it's a really bad idea for equity and accountability, where we say, but all schools must do this to serve our children to the level the state says is adequate and appropriate for an education.
I agree with parts of that. My comeback to you, Professor, in that equity thing is that equity is not just that one particular part, it's the whole. And a lot of times when you're using a dashboard, you also want to see all the things that maybe another school has, as opposed to what your school is offering. Like, I'm looking at things as important, and Carlene's kind of pointed out the childcare, the different other programs that are in there. That's part of equity and accountability as well, because parents need those things. Specifically, parents that have been historically underserved need those same type of things. And to them, that is their definition of equity. Am I getting what Northwest gets? Am I getting the same quality of school? And am I also getting all of the resources and the other things that they offer? Because I can tell you right now, when I look at equity as a parent, and when I was placing my children in school, I know I wasn't getting that at the DCPS school in my neighborhood, which is Turner, as opposed to Ludlow Taylor. So I hear your debate, and I hear where it can be moved into choice, but it's also an equity when we're talking about it in a holistic sense, not just a.
And I'm gonna say one sentence on this and then move us to our final thing. The way I would accept your premise, Jessica, that we want to hold everybody to the same standard, but I think the dashboard does it better, because you can see for every one of the things that we're talking about, we can see whether this school has gotten to 100% or it's only at 50. And you can't see that in the summative. And we'll debate this more and more. So let me just, with our 7 minutes, thoughts about engagement. And it's partly just so we can get this going, so we can all think about how to continue the conversation. And I don't know, does anybody have anything particular to, I mean, there's surveys, there's ward meetings. It does seem you could have a public meeting that would, one of our monthly meetings that was heavily focused on this to encourage sort of a citywide audience. You could do ward meetings.
My framing question is, do we want to broadly gauge the public's response to what exists and use that to inform our suggestions? Or do we want to draft some suggestions and ask the public to weigh in on our ideas?
Wasn't that like follow-up for something you guys voted on? Or not you guys, it was something that the board voted on last year about collecting information? Or is that a different conversation? Wasn't there a resolution about collecting information? Was it around stars or some sort of accountability?
I think in the interim report, we said we would collect more information. And I think the question is like, what's the way to do that? Is it to broadly say, what do y'all think of the current system? What would you like to see different? Or would we want to say, we've heard from experts, here are some ideas on what we'd like to make different.
What do you think?
Do you concur? Do you have others?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say my view is, yeah, we've heard from experts, there's that. And we've also, everybody here has heard a lot from their constituents as well. So I think we have enough to sort of make some good, not today, but in a month or 2 months or whenever we decide to do it, some, tentative recommendations that might have sub questions to them, but that would become a basis for going out and collecting responses to something that was a couple of, some yards down the road or a mile down the road. I
like to get like raw information, because it could be, if we bring recommendations, we could frame it in a way that we might be forgetting something or looking beyond something or miss something. So I would like a way of just kind of hearing what people are thinking or what they want, and then maybe come back and see if it goes in any patterns. But I would hate to like bring 3 options or however many options, and then people, we got them thinking one way and we might miss something.
I support that, Carlene, because I'll note, Ruth, I have not gone out and asked Ward 6 broadly, what do you like in Star, what do you dislike in Star? And I know candidly that we often hear from the same voices in Ward 6 over and over again compared to the totality of residents.
I also have to add, talking to, I have tried to talk to some folks just at like some pop-up events. And it's sometimes it can be very, it can be very broad. It was just interesting. I was like, I just asked like, what are you interested in schooling? People were like, math and reading. So, we probably might need, somebody was mentioning a blend. We might just need like, some materials to help frame the conversation to keep folks on. Because after I did some like pop up, like, hey, what are you thinking about X, Y, and Z? I was like, it might also be a moment to kind of educate folks about like, this is what the system is, this is what the current components are. Your like thoughts on that, so that we give people something to frame the conversation around. But I like those like catching people who aren't necessarily folks who always get asked those questions or chime in on those questions.
And that could be a way also to do a little of both, which is you start with, here's what we have, what do you think? And then you can say, you could have sort of follow-ups of, okay, this asked about the math and reading test. Would you like, are there other subjects? Or you could sort of have some follow-up, so you don't go right into the proposals, but you help to pull out more content from the response. Is that what you're saying, Carlene? Is that a fair way to read that?
I tuned out. I'm sorry. You said blended?
No, I think part of what I hear from you is that it could be, you could in a way do both, that you start with something that's broad. What do you think of this? Here's how we rate schools. What do you think? You take that in, but then you have follow-ups like, you said this about the reading and math test. Are there other subjects? Or you said this about the 10, so that you could do both. Try to figure out how to.
I like the follow-up, because sometimes just thinking, once you pitch things, people give information, people, I think, chew on information and, ponder it sometimes, and they might have some other views or things that come up outside the allotted date and time that was set to initially discuss it. So I like the idea of a follow-up.
We're close to time, and I love action items. So is that okay if we jump into, we do need a work plan for coming up in April. And so I'm going to leave you guys to that, but I just wanted to jump in.
So I think this is what Jacque and I had talked about, which is that following this, we're going to sit down and try to come up with something that sort of works our way towards a plan that does all this, right? And then for the next meeting, reacting to that plan, improving it, changing it, adding to it would be a lot of what we did. And then we would be able to go into I think it's the working meeting in April. Is that what we want to go into with a work plan?
Yes, but we would need the information by the end of this month in order to include it in the larger discussion in the Gantt chart development and those types of things. And one additional potential wrinkle, Darren will be out of the office the week of March 29th.
But what I hear is not April, but May is what I hear.
You have, what I'm saying is you have next week to meet again.
Well, can I ask a question on this? Because this is a little bit new to us. We made a big point of having a second meeting in March so that we could keep to this schedule. And our second meeting is on March 31st. So either that's good enough, or what you're telling us is we need to move up that meeting.
I'm happy to staff the meeting on the 31st in Darren's place. That's not a problem. The problem is making sure that from that meeting, the committee is in agreement on what the work plan is. I think that's probably the latest date that we potentially could do it, right? Because it needs to be.
So can I make a suggestion? I think if you and Jacque were to draft a work plan and share it with the rest of us, then we could finalize it at the March 31st meeting so that it could be in the hands of staff at the end of that 90 minutes.
Right, because it doesn't actually give you that week.
Or shortly thereafter. I think that's a good way to think about it.
Right, because it doesn't actually give you a full week because the staff will need time to bring all of the work plans together into a thing, and we can't do that quickly. I mean, it's just gonna take time.
I think that works. Jacque, agree? So we're agreeing to have something together and out to people maybe by the end of next week, which is sort of what we had thought, and then we'll all come back on the 31st and either kind of ratify it there, or, you know, if not, we have a day or two. Is that fair, jump all just to that Friday to just sort of do whatever we need to do and get it to?
Well, the hope was from my discussions with leadership is to have the Gantt chart ready for all board members to review by that Friday in terms of our normal process and getting materials out for board members to review. So, I mean,
Right.
it would be challenging, but we'll do everything that we can to make sure that that we get it done.
We'll do our best to be done by the end.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Ms. Carlene, how you doing over there?
What?
I was like, happy planning, Ruth and Jacque.
I can see the smile, like you were like, have some fun with that.
Well, I already have mine from outreach and accountability this morning. So
I have one question, especially to Jessica and Carlene, because Jacque and I can sort of do it as part of the planning, is if there's something in particular that you feel personally you want to know more about, or you want other people on the committee to know more about, so that we can think about, you know, is there additional research? Are there additional speakers? You know, where are you in that continuum? Where do you see us in that continuum? Because, you know, how much time we want to spend collecting more versus we got a lot of stuff here and now we really want to start getting out there and start playing it out. That's part of what I really want to hear in terms of the work.
Yep.
Okay. 2:33. So this is how bad my arithmetic is. I just want to say, I looked at my clock, it said 2:33 and I'm like, we're 3 minutes ahead. How good. But actually we're 3 minutes off. But anyway. Everybody good?
yes.
Have a great weekend.
Bye, all.
Weekend, everybody. Thanks. And can I just say, Darren or whoever, will you save that check? Because I really haven't looked at it. And send that to me. All right. Thanks, Mr. Co-Chair and Mr. Director and Mr. Policy Analyst Committee staff.
Thank you guys for helping us with this. And
Yeah.
thank you.